Good afternoon, welcome to my kitchen. This week I wanted to share with you some of my favorite basic recipes. These are recipes that really got me started in the kitchen years ago, and from these I was able to build onto more and more things. So these really feel to me like very foundational recipes that every homemaker should know. So if you're a beginner, even if you're not, I'm here to share with you a lot of my favorite from scratch recipes. Starting with bread. Many of you know that I have been making bread from scratch for quite some time. I have not purchased bread from the grocery store in probably 2 years now. And that is because I have learned how to make it from scratch and work it into my routine so that it's doable for me. This means that I'm not always doing sourdough because often I just need something a little bit quicker. If I'm ahead of schedule and I can feed my sourdough starter on time and get on it, then yes, I do sourdough bread. But for the sake of ease, in today's video, I won't be sharing with you my sourdough sandwich bread recipe. I'm going to be sharing my quick sandwich bread as well as my favorite sourdough discard burger buns, which I also use to make sub buns and pizza buns and all kinds of other things. These are two bread doughs that I'm making almost every single week, if not even twice a week. I have a kitty attacking my ankles. I don't think I have officially introduced you to our newest member. This is Pearl. She is the newest member of our family, and she is very, very loved by everyone. Say hi, Pearl. Okay, let's get started. In my mixing bowl, I'm just gonna throw in all the ingredients. Most of this is measured by weight. So there's warm water, yeast, honey, egg, coconut oil, salt, flour. I'm going to add it all in, but I'm not going to add the whole amount of flour. I always do a little bit less than what it calls for, and then I'll slowly add in what I need as it's mixing. It's always easier to have a stickier dough and add in more flour if need be than to have a dry dough and have to add more water. So you could see here it was a little bit too sticky. So as it continued to mix, I continued to add some flour until it got to about this consistency. You want to continue to knead the dough until it's soft and workable. You don't have to form this into a ball. I just let it sit in my mixer like this, and I cover the bowl with a plate and let it rise in a warm place. So once the dough has doubled in size, then I can start on the next step. So usually it takes like 2, sometimes 3 hours for it to rise to this point. And you can see the dough is a bit sticky, but I'm not going to add any more flour. I'm just going to work with the dough, kind of folding it over itself to work up some tension. Once the dough starts to come into a smooth ball, I will divide the dough in half because this makes 2 loaves, and I'll use a scale to weigh out the loaves so that they are about the same. Is this necessary? No, but I'm not very good at eyeballing. So I like to use a scale to get a more accurate measurement. Then I can start shaping the loaves. And I do it in a very simple way. I just kind of flatten out the ball into a rectangle, just patting it down with my hands. Then I'll roll it up. I'll pinch all the edges and I'll kind of tug at the ends and fold it over themselves. Then I'll just kind of pull the dough along the surface of the counter. This helps to create more tension in the loaf and smooth out the dough, and you don't need to worry too much about what it looks like. Honestly, it doesn't matter if your loaf looks really pretty at this point or if it doesn't, because when it rises, it always looks beautiful. Again, I'll just let this rise in a warm place. I'll cover it with a kitchen towel until it has doubled in size again, and then I'll put it into a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes, or until the temperature of the loaf reaches between 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And I use a thermometer to check that. Once the bread loaves are done, I immediately take them out of their pans and let them cool on a rack, and I'll spread them with butter. This helps to soften the crust. And then once they are completely cool, I will wrap them in saran wrap and allow them to sit like that over the night. Wrapping it up this way allows it to continue to soften. I love how soft and fluffy the sandwich loaf is. Definitely a winner in my opinion. Moving on to sourdough discard burger buns. It starts off very much the same way as the bread that I just showed you. In the mixing bowl, I'm just pouring in all the ingredients. We've got warm water and yeast, This time I'm using some sourdough discard and then coconut oil, eggs, salt, all the same, very similar ingredients. Again, I don't put in the whole amount of flour. I will put that on the mixer and then slowly add more flour as needed. And you know, it's funny, with Mennonite doughs like this, they don't even have a flour measurement. It's all by feel. And it's something you kind of have to practice and learn to understand what a bread or bun dough should feel like. But if I could describe it, it would be still slightly sticky, but it shouldn't stick too much to your hands. It should be workable and soft, and you should be able to form it into a smooth ball. Then just like the bread dough, I'm going to put a plate over the mixing bowl and let it rest in a warm place for a few hours. When I come back to it, it should be doubled in size, and this is what it looks like. It's super fluffy. There's lots of strands of gluten that have developed. So I'm gonna pull it out. This is a double batch. I'm going to again work the dough just like I did the bread dough to get it to a point where it's not so sticky. And then I'm going to split it in two so that I can work with two batches here. So one batch I'm going to make into the sourdough burger buns, and then the other one I'm going to do like a sub bun or a hot dog bun. So each batch of dough I'm going to divide into 8 equal pieces. So because this is a double batch, I ended up with 16 individual buns. One batch I am shaping into my classic buns. So I just kind of flatten out each ball, tug all the corners into the center and pinch it all together. And then I will put it on the tabletop and use my hands to cup the dough and pull it along the surface of the counter. I'll do this a few times to, again, create more tension in the dough to form a ball. And that's it. It takes no time at all to make a batch of buns. Now for the sub buns or hot dog buns, I basically just shape these exactly the same way as I shape my bread loaf. So I'll flatten it out into a little rectangle, roll it up, pinch all the edges, tug the ends and fold it over themselves. Then again, I'm just going to roll it along the surface of the counter to create a tiny loaf shape. I do find the longer that I make these, the better, because they do puff up quite a bit and they don't need to be perfect. Honestly, it is a little bit harder to get this shape than it is to get the bun shape, but in the end it doesn't really matter how it looks because it's going to taste delicious anyway. Once all the buns are shaped, again, I'll just cover it with a towel because this is a yeast dough. It rises very quickly. So once it has doubled in size, it takes about an hour or so. I like to brush these with an egg wash. This isn't necessary, but I like how it looks. It gives the buns kind of a shinier, more polished finish. For the burger buns, I also like to sprinkle on some sesame seeds. And then for the hot dog buns or sub buns, I like to score them. Again, these aren't necessary steps, but I think it helps them to look pretty. Then I'll bake them at 350 degrees for about 16 to 18 minutes, or again, until they reach 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll let these cool completely and then bag them up. I got these bread bags off of Amazon a long time ago. It came in a pack of like 100. Because I made a double batch, I like to freeze one of those batches to have on hand. All right, hair's going up, apron's going on, because things are about to get messy. I'm about to do something that I've been meaning to do for the last year, and that is make tomato sauce. I have had these bags and bags of tomatoes sitting in my freezer, some from last summer, some from this summer. It's a collection of tomatoes from both our garden and other gardens. So as the tomatoes ripened, I washed them, sliced them up into like quarters or in halves, and froze them in these Ziploc bags. Now I am able to strain off a lot of the extra liquid instead of having to spend hours and hours simmering it down. There's a lot of different ways to make tomato sauce. I'm gonna try the blender method this time, the freezer blender method. Usually I will roast whole tomatoes and then blend them up and make a sauce that way. But because I have all these in the freezer, I'm going to try the freezer blender method this time and see how that works out. This was a super interesting experience for me because I've never done anything like this before. And I was shocked by how much tomato water was just coming out of these bags of frozen tomatoes. Now I did kind of squish these down and strain them quite a bit. I wouldn't do that again. Looking back, I wouldn't press them down. I would just kind of pour out the extra water and then continue on my way. I do feel like it almost got too thick because I really pressed out a lot of that water. But I really love this method because it was so fast and so simple. I just had to strain the water out, put the tomatoes into a blender, and then pour that into my strainer. This strainer worked really well, but this process of turning the handle does take quite some time. So it requires some patience and some arm muscle. But I think this really is the fastest way to make tomato sauce, or at least the fastest way that I've ever tried. The only thing I did not like about this was the fact that these tomatoes were still raw, and my family, myself included, we don't enjoy the smell or taste of raw tomatoes, and I do feel like that affected the overall taste of the tomato sauce. So I have enough tomato sauce to make a 3 times batch of my tomato sauce recipe. I ended up with 5 liters of tomato puree. This isn't cooked at all, but it's thick already. I'm going to heat it up and cook it a little bit just so that it's not raw. But I needed to know how much I had so that I could know how many onions and garlic and what else to add. I'm actually going to cook that in a separate pot and then add it in to the tomato sauce, cook it down a bit, blend it up, and we should be good to go. I actually didn't have enough room in my pot to cook these onions and garlic, so that's why I did it in a separate pot. I do feel like the flavor probably would have been better had I cooked them in the tomato sauce, but I did get the tomatoes simmering. I added the salt, sugar, basil, and then all of the cooked onions and garlic, and I blended it all together with my immersion blender until it was really nice and smooth. Now, because I am making such a huge batch of tomato sauce, I am going to be canning it up today, and I'm going to show you my process of canning. This is not a necessary step. You could freeze it if you make a big batch, or you can make smaller batches and not worry about this at all. I have added a lot more flavor to this pot of tomato sauce. I have done a lot more sugar, salt, garlic powder, onion powder, oregano, just trying to get it to the flavor that I like. It's interesting because I've made this particular recipe before a couple years ago, but I did the tomatoes differently instead of doing this freezer method. And I remember the flavor of the tomato sauce being so good. But this time, it just didn't turn out the way that it usually does. It didn't have the flavor that we love and enjoy in a tomato sauce. And I think that hugely comes down to the way that I prepare the tomatoes. So I've been simmering it. It sat in the fridge overnight. I've added lots of flavors to it, and I've gotten it to a point where it's got good flavor. So now I'm going to can it up. For canning the tomato sauce, I did quart-sized jars because we use quite a bit of tomato sauce in a single meal. In the bottom of each of these jars, I added some lemon juice to help bring up the acidity for safe canning. We did actually eat some of this tomato sauce the night before for our supper. After all was said and done, I got about 4.5 cans of tomato sauce. Now I'm using my handy canning tool to get out any air bubbles, and then I'm using the measuring tool at the top of this to make sure that there is about 1/2 inch of head space left. Then I wiped down the rims of the jars with a little bit of vinegar and clean paper towel. Put my warm lids on and then screwed on the rims just a fingertip tight. You don't want it too tight, but you want it tight enough that it's not going to open up in the canner. Then into the canner they all went. I added a little bit of water to the canner to make sure that there was at least 2 inches of water above the jars. And then these processed for 45 minutes at my elevation. Processing time does not start until the water is at a full boil, and then when it's done, I took off the lid, I turned off the heat, and I let those jars sit in there for about 5 to 10 minutes before pulling them out and letting them sit on the counter. When your jars seal, you should hear a pop, and that is always a great sound because it means that you have successfully canned. When I first started in the kitchen, I was quite young, and the first thing that I started doing was baking. And I loved baking. I still do. In fact, I wanted to be a baker when I got older, and I did have a baking job for a while. Now I get to use those skills in my own kitchen for my own family. One of the first things I learned how to make was chocolate chip cookies, and I feel like everyone needs to have a good chocolate chip cookie recipe in their back pocket because it's just essential. All my life, I have done my own baking at home from scratch, not from a box. Truthfully, making cakes, making cookies from scratch is not that much more difficult or time consuming than to do it from a box, and it's way better. We're gonna make some chocolate chip cookies for tonight. I could probably make cookies with my eyes closed at this point. I've made them so many times in my life. It always starts with softened butter and sugars in the mixer, getting it well beaten and mixed up. Then to that, you're going to add the eggs and the vanilla and continue to mix it. While that's mixing, you can get started on your dry ingredients, which is usually flour, baking powder, baking soda, salt. Give that a whisk and then slowly add your wet ingredients into your dry ingredients. And these are chocolate chip cookies, so I added some chocolate chips. I never add the full amount of chocolate chips. I always do about half the amount of what it calls for. You're looking for a dough that's not too sticky, that's gonna hold its shape, but you don't want it to be crumbly. Once your dough is ready, you can start scooping out your cookies and get your oven ready. I think I bake these at 375, 350. I'll leave the recipe linked below, but this recipe is great. It's my go-to. I bake these for 8 minutes or until the edges start to get a little bit brown. I let them start cooling down on the pan, and then I will transfer them to a wire rack to finish cooling. These are ooey gooey delicious. Moving on to ice cream, I'm gonna share a very simple, basic ice cream recipe. Is this the best ice cream recipe? No, but it is very simple and definitely hits the spot when you want some ice cream. Now, I am using an ice cream maker for this recipe, so keep that in mind. But in a pot, I am adding cream, milk, sugar, and a splash of vanilla. And I'm just warming it up until the sugar is dissolved. You know the sugar is dissolved when you don't feel any of those sugar grains in between your fingers when you rub them together. I'm gonna put this mixture into the fridge to cool down completely. I always store the bowl of this ice cream machine in my freezer so that I'm prepared for any occasion when I feel like making ice cream. I'll turn my machine on, I'll pour in that cool down mixture and just let it go. At first, it doesn't look like it's ever gonna turn into ice cream, but after about 20 minutes, it gets really thick and creamy. Found these cookie crumbs in my freezer, so I added them to the ice cream. So I'm making cookies and cream ice cream today. But I love this recipe because it's so simple and basic, and you can mix it up. You can add whatever flavors you want. You can add cocoa powder to make it chocolate. You can get creative and enjoy some fresh ice cream really quick. I'm just gonna store this in the freezer and eat it whenever I feel like it. When I really started taking scratch-made foods more seriously, one of the first things that I started doing was making yogurt from scratch. This was way out of my comfort zone. It sounded crazy, but I realized it's way simpler than it sounds. And so I have been doing this consistently every single week for about 2 years now, maybe even 3 years. I don't remember. It's been a very long time, but I do it every single week. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. I like to do it in my pressure cooker. Do you need a pressure cooker? No, you actually just need like a Dutch oven and a stovetop, and that works perfectly fine. But this is the method that I've been doing for years. So I start with my pressure cooker. I'm gonna get some water in here. Basically, I just want this to come to a boil so that everything gets sanitized and warm. Once everything is heated up, I will pour out the water and then pour in my milk. I always do 3 liters of milk for every batch of yogurt. I am using skimmed milk, but you can use full fat. And basically you just want to heat it up to 180 degrees, and then you want to cool it down to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm now putting it into an ice bath, and I'm gonna let it sit there for about 10 minutes or until it reaches 110 degrees. Now once it gets to that point, I'm going to scoop out a little bit and slowly pour it into a separate bowl with some yogurt starter. Today I'm using about 2 tablespoons of yogurt from my previous batch, but you can also use plain Greek yogurt from the store. You just want to slowly pour in that warm milk into the yogurt and whisk really well so that there's no lumps. Once everything is mixed well, you can pour this mixture back into that big bowl of milk, give that another mix, and then put it back into the pressure cooker. I put mine on the yogurt setting for 24 hours. This is what it looks like after 24 hours. It has thickened up, it smells like yogurt, so I'm gonna give this a really good whisk to make sure there are no lumps remaining. Now that the yogurt has been cooked, it needs to be strained. You could just eat it like this. It is quite thin. We prefer a thicker yogurt, like a Greek yogurt, so I'm going to strain it. I have here a little system that I've rigged up. So I've got my big pot, then one of these colanders sitting right on top, and then cheesecloth that goes over top of that. You can just pour the yogurt into cheesecloth and then tie the ends and hang it up on a handle of your kitchen cupboard, but I just find this works really easy, and then I can also store it in the fridge as it's straining. So I'm just going to pour all this into here. 3 liters of milk is the perfect amount for what I have here. And this is going in the fridge for 6 hours. I've even left it up to 2 days before. We'll get back to that later. I actually completely forgot about this for 24 hours, 48 hours, I don't remember. We got sick after this, and so it was kind of a blur. And I have to laugh at myself because I am the queen of using bowls that are way too small and making this way messier than it needs to be. Obviously, because I left my yogurt for a really long time, it was very thick. I added some of that whey back into the yogurt, and then I like to sweeten our yogurt with some maple syrup. I never measure this, I always eyeball it. I just go for the texture that I like, the sweetness that our family likes. Sometimes I also like to add a splash of vanilla to our yogurt, but this is the texture that we go for. We like it to be pretty thick, but very smooth. This gets stored in the fridge and it will be gone within a week. I'm always left with a whole bunch of whey at the end of this. I like to keep this in my fridge. I can pour it in smoothies. You can use it in soup broths. This is super great for you, really gut friendly. It's really nice to have in the fridge. Let's talk about mayo for a second, because this has to be the quickest, easiest thing that you can make from scratch. All you need is an egg and about 1 cup of avocado oil, and that is your base. Anything else is optional. I like to add salt and pepper to mine, a little bit of honey or sugar, either lemon juice or vinegar, and then using my immersion blender, I just slowly mix this up. I like to do small pulses at first and then slowly work my way up. I find this gives the best results. There is the odd occasion where it doesn't work out, but usually following these steps, it turns out beautifully. Mayo is such a staple for us to have on hand because with this mayo and the yogurt that I always have on hand, I'm easily able to whip up dips of any kind. The base of my dips and sauces is half mayo, half yogurt, and then whatever flavors I want. Knowing how to make mayo and yogurt really opens a whole window of opportunity. Next, we are making granola. In my opinion, this is probably one of the easiest things that you can start making from scratch. It obviously goes hand in hand with the yogurt, but we also really enjoy eating it just as cereal. Honestly, I've been making the same recipe for the last almost 2 years now, and I haven't changed it up once because we enjoy it that much. But if I wanted to, it wouldn't be difficult to do. You can substitute different nuts or different seeds. There's so much freedom with granola, which is really fun. It never gets boring because you can do endless flavor combinations. When I make it, I always double the recipe, and then I store it in Ziploc bags and freeze it. And I know that sounds weird, but it works really well. It preserves perfectly in the freezer, and strangely enough, eating frozen granola is really yummy. There are so many different granola recipes out there, but the one I use starts with the dry ingredients first, getting that mixed together, then adding the coconut oil and mixing it all together so that everything's evenly coated before adding the sweeteners, and then it's just a matter of baking everything until it's crispy. I really feel like the star of the show in this granola is pecans, and I always do more pecans than what the recipe calls for because we just love toasted pecans. I'll add the rest of the dry ingredients and get that mixed up. I love the cinnamon that's in this granola as well. It's really yummy. Like I said, once the dry ingredients are mixed up, then you add the coconut oil. You want to mix that really well. Make sure all the dry ingredients are fully coated in that coconut oil. And then it's just a matter of adding some honey, some syrup, and some vanilla and giving that one more mix. Then this goes onto the baking sheets. Because I'm doing a double recipe, I have 2 baking sheets. And I like to use a lot of parchment paper for this. I like to cover the entire pan because if the pan is not covered with parchment paper, this granola has a tendency to stick to the pan. The granola is going to bake for 30 minutes, but I'm gonna pull the pans out of the oven every 10 minutes to give them a stir and just swap racks. Stirring the granola is very important so that it doesn't get clumpy, so that it bakes evenly. And it looks a little bit deceiving when you bake granola because when it is done, it doesn't actually look or feel crispy, but as it cools down, it hardens up. It's a matter of looking for the right coloring and making sure that you don't overcook it or undercook it. Fun fact, we were running out the door last night, so I didn't have a chance to finish up the granola. So I left it on the counter for the night, I covered it with a towel, and I figured I'd just, come back to it the next morning. Well, when I came back to it this morning, the granola had turned almost soggy. I've been making this granola for years, and this is the first time that has ever happened to me. So note to self, never cover your granola with a towel overnight because it will get soft. I actually threw it back in the oven at 350 for 5 minutes, and once it cooled down, it did crisp up again. Thankfully, so nothing's gone to waste. It is crispy, and now I finally have time to finish it up. This is completely optional, but I'm a fan of chocolate. So I'm going to add some chocolate chips to my granola now that it's cooled down. You could add dried fruit, you could add whatever you want. You don't have to add anything if you don't want to. I enjoy some chocolate. I'm gonna go light on the chocolate though because chocolate has gotten really expensive. Now I'm just going to add some to my jar for fresh eating right now, and then whatever's left over I'll store into Ziploc bags and freeze. In my personal opinion, I think everybody needs to know how to make granola bars. They are so fast and so easy to make. And for me, when I learned how to do this, it gave me the freedom to stop buying snacks from the grocery store, and you would not believe how much money we have saved by simply making granola bars at home. I have developed a recipe that is very easy to tweak to the flavors that I want to tweak it to. The recipe itself has flavors of cinnamon and then chocolate chips on top. Today I'm going to make a chocolate version, so I'm going to omit the cinnamon and use cocoa powder instead. You could add seeds, nuts, dried fruit, really whatever flavors you would like to make these completely customizable to what you like. This recipe starts on the stovetop with some butter and some brown sugar, some honey. Because I am substituting the cinnamon with cocoa powder, I find it's easier to add the cocoa powder into this wet mixture as well. And you want to heat this up just until it starts to bubble or simmer. While that's heating up, I like to prepare my pan, and to do so, I will scrunch up a piece of parchment paper just so that it fits easier in the pan. I like to line the whole pan for ease of cleanup later on. Once the wet ingredients have come to a simmer, I'll add a little bit of vanilla and then the rest of the ingredients. So we've got cereal, oats, and ground flaxseed. And then it's a matter of mixing it up and pouring it in a pan. It's that simple. I'll usually spread this out as best I can with a wooden spoon. Then I'll sprinkle on any toppings that I feel like adding. Today I'm doing just a little bit of chocolate chips. And then to get it pressed down really firmly, the best thing I have found is to get another piece of parchment paper and really press down hard. If it's really pressed down, these bars will hold their shape better. I place these in the fridge to cool overnight, and then I slice them up into bars, and that's it. You can wrap them up in some parchment paper if you want to. I do this sometimes, especially if we plan on taking them out of the house just to prevent some mess. But it's a lot of work, and usually I just end up storing them in containers, and that works just as well. Every time I make this, my kids tell me that my granola bars are the best, and I take that as a compliment because I know how much they enjoy store-bought snacks. So if they enjoy my super quick and easy granola bars, I am more than happy to make those for them. Bone broth is the base of so many recipes. I use it all the time. It's so handy to have on hand. And surprisingly, it's super hard to find clean bone broths at the grocery store. And if you can find it, it's really expensive. The good news is it's extremely easy to make at home. There's hundreds of different ways that you could go about making bone broth. It's a very simple process. It's just a matter of cooking bones in water. You can add flavors like vegetables, onions, even herbs to your bone broth. You just want to cook it low and slow until all that flavor is pulled from the bones. You can use any kind of bone. I'm using pork bone today. Usually I'm doing chicken bones or beef bones, but this is what we have right now. We actually butchered a pig on the weekend, so we have some bones that we can use for bone broth now, which is really nice. I'll be honest, most of the time I just throw the bones straight into the pressure cooker and I cook it like that. I'll throw in like an onion, carrots, maybe some bay leaves, and cover it with water. I'm going to go the extra step this time to try and pull some more flavors from the bones though. So I'm going to drizzle these bones with a little bit of olive oil, some salt and pepper, and I'm going to throw them into the oven. It's at 450 right now. I'm just going to let these roast probably for about 30 minutes, and then I'll get them in the pressure cooker after that. So I'm seasoning up my bones and rubbing that oil and seasoning in. Then I actually baked them, I think at 425 for about 45 minutes. You don't have to do this in a pressure cooker, but I like to because I can put it in and then set the timer and forget about it. I don't have to babysit it. In fact, I often do this in the evening and let it cook throughout the night so that I have fresh broth the next day. Added some carrots, some onions, filled it up to the top with water. My bone broth has been cooking all night long. Now in order to strain this, I have the exact same setup I had with my yogurt. So I've got the big pot on the bottom, then the strainer or colander, and then the cheesecloth on top. And I like to run it through a cheesecloth to get out any little bits. I'm gonna dump this whole thing into there. Funny story, there was one time when I did this and I obviously wasn't thinking straight and I got the colander and the cheesecloth set out, but I forgot to put the pot underneath. So when I dumped my broth, it went straight down the drain and we completely lost all of that bone broth. So please don't forget the pot. I'm gonna let this sit and strain for a little while longer, and then I can just toss all of this and then we are left with bone broth. You can see there is some fat rising to the surface already. I'm gonna let this cool down in the fridge so that all of this can solidify on top and then I can easily scoop it off. Okay, I know this looks gross, but this is a sign of a good broth. Once it's completely cooled down, the fat's gonna settle on top, and there isn't actually a lot of fat on top. So I'm gonna scrape that off. But you can tell how it's sort of gelatinized. It's thickened up and it's almost like a jelly texture. This is what a bone broth should look like when it's cooled down. And then when it's warmed back up, it'll go back to its liquidy state. I've actually made broth before that has been quite a bit thicker. If that's what your broth does, don't be alarmed. That's actually a good thing. That concludes today's video. I hope this was helpful for anyone who is wanting to get into making more foods from scratch, maybe feeling overwhelmed, or honestly just looking for some good recipes. Everything will be linked down below. We have been eating a lot of these things already throughout the week, so I don't have everything here to show you. But these are staple recipes in our home, and a lot of these recipes I've been making for years and years and make them almost weekly. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.